Robin still has many questions about Matthew's family, so he's heading to Paisley, 7 miles west of Glasgow, to try and find some answers.
He was Matthew at the ragged school. What was the family doing?
All I know about William, his father, is that he was a hand-loom weaver. He's the guy I've got to shed more light on, it's William.
Paisley was at the centre of the weaving trade, and the town's museum has a huge collection relating to the industry.
Hi, Dan.
Hello, how do you do?
Good to see you.
Dan Coughlin has spent 20 years researching the history and technology of the Paisley weavers.
I know that my great-great-grandfather, William, was a hand-loom weaver.
I think one of his daughters was also an assistant.
Is that right, yeah?
What exactly would that entail?
Well, at that time, if he was in Paisley, he was probably a shawl weaver. And I have some shawls here which I can show you, just to show you what they were producing, which is quite impressive.
Gosh, that's great.
This would have been a typical product of the looms at the time your ancestor was
How
here.
long would it take to make one?
Well, it was broken up into maybe 12 or 13 different trades. The dyer, the warper, the beamer, lots of different trades. Nevertheless, the weaver was highly skilled. You can see yourself, it's very, very fine fabric.
Yeah. What was there special about Paisley being at the centre of this?
Weaving during that period was probably the biggest industry in Britain.
Yeah.
And you had areas which specialised in particular fabrics. So you had, for instance, Dunfermline specialised in damask, Paisley specialised in the Paisley shawl. So you had a very highly trained, highly skilled body of weavers in Paisley. So if there was any special fabric to be produced, this is where it would be produced.
The famous Paisley pattern
Yes.
that people speak of today all over the world is actually originated here.
It takes its name from Paisley. It was originally called an imitation Indian because it was an imitation of the cashmere shawl. But Paisley produced them in such abundance and the trade lasted for so long that it became known as the Paisley pattern.
In the 1851 census, William's daughter Jean was listed as a hand-loom weaver's assistant.
The fact that there was a girl helping him suggests that he was probably working on a draw loom, and the young boy or girl, which is called a draw boy or a draw girl, had to draw the strings here, and that raised the warp threads for the weaver. So it was a two-person loom. It does look very complicated.
It's getting tangled up that I would worry about.
So I can show you how the loom works if you want.
That would be lovely, yes.
This is the jacquard loom here, and the pattern is actually encoded into these cards here. Mm. So when I press my foot on the treadle, it activates the jacquard head up there.
And this is very obviously time-consuming.
It is indeed, yeah. In this one here, it's 100 threads per inch. But if you were doing it in a Paisley shawl and you had 100 threads per inch, you'd have to multiply that by 7 or 8 or how many colours you were using. So it could be several hundred per inch.
You have different cards. You could put different cards in.
There's a different card for every colour.
Right.
Weavers worked in small groups for an agent who decided on the designs and yarns and negotiated prices. The patterns were lavish and intricate, and the Paisley shawl was a high fashion garment, worn by wealthy women and popularised by Queen Victoria. At the height of the trade, the Paisley weavers were amongst the highest paid artisans in Britain.
At one time, weaving was a very prosperous trade to be in. They call it the golden age of hand weaving. The weavers were very well paid.
So in 1851, William, who was 38 years old at the time, was a full-time weaver and probably the peak of his powers. Where was the situation in Paisley as far as
well,
weaving?
they were almost exclusively weaving shawls at that time, and that was just about the peak of the shawl trade. After that, it
so
went
that was
into
its best.
That probably, yes.
That's fascinating. What I've learned is that it was a kind of very prestigious profession when it was at its height in Paisley. My problem is there's so many things left unanswered. Here we have William, we know him by name and we know what he did. But I think maybe something went dramatically wrong within the family. There was some kind of crisis that actually affected the whole family to a critical point.
To find out what it was that caused the family breakdown, Robin's come to Paisley Library to search the archives with librarian David Weir.
One of the things to understand about the, the weaving trade is that the weaving trade had severe fluctuations. So 1 year you could be earning top dollar and next year be out of work.
The newspapers date from 1850 and 51.
So we've got here an article here, heading State of Trade, and this is from 1850.
It says here there is no improvement in the condition of trade here so far as the working population are concerned. Large numbers are still out of employment and have been so for many weeks past.
In the area, I can look at State of Trade, that one there.
So there's a state of trade. Paisley has suffered very severely in the general dullness prevalent throughout the country.
So we've got a month later, this is another article along similar lines, and it's the State of Trade.
So it says here, State of Trade. We are very happy to state that the trade of the town, which has been very dull for several months past, is now generally improved.
I think what the articles in these papers illustrate is just how volatile the trade was. But from this period on, the volatility continues, and really there's a general decline in the number of weavers employed in handloom weaving.
Despite the popularity of Paisley shawls in the early 1850s, the trade was under threat. Britain was in the midst of a revolution. Mechanised power looms were taking over from the hand loom weavers, and when they worked harder to compete, they succeeded only in flooding the market and driving down prices. The power loom could never weave a pattern as complex as a Paisley, but the mass production of cheap printed shawls drove down demand for the real thing. For the town's weaving community, the results were disastrous.
Now these documents here are statements from the Paisley poorhouse. This system was the equivalent of today's social security or unemployment benefit. This is William Gibb, Matthew's father.
4th of November, that is 1854.
Yep.
William Gibb, applicant's name, married, of course it has him married in Paisley to Agnes. And it's, of course, here she died on the 12th of July last.
Yeah.
So she died in 1854, in July of that year.
Yep.
That's very sad.
On the 16th of November 1854, William Gibb left his family destitute and said that he was going in search of work. He said he was going in search of work.
As he had nothing to do in Paisley, so there was no work for him in Paisley. Clearly his wife...
His wife had died?
His wife had died, and probably he just wasn't able to cope with 5 children.
According to the records, William was away for 2 years. He travelled round Scotland looking for work, leaving his children to be cared for by the parish.
4th of September 1856, William Gibb never returned to receive his children. All his children are away from him.
It's almost as if he abandoned the family.
While William was absent, his children, aged from 4 to 17, were fending for themselves.
12th of November 1857 again.
Matthew in Ragged School.
And Agnes?
Agnes
was with
a person in service.
Right, so she was in service, obviously, as a maid or something. Janet and
Belle in New Street. So he's not looking after any of his children.
By 1860, nearly 750 of the 800 weavers registered in Paisley were unemployed. 3 years later, William Gibb reappeared in the records.
On the 31st of June, certified by
Falconer.
Dr. Falconer,
yep,
to be weak from destitution.
Yes. His physical state is really deteriorated to the extent where he doesn't feel he can go on, I think. You know, by that period, really, the weaving trade was well in decline, and, you know, that William Gibb wouldn't have been the only person to have ended up destitute. And,
January the 30th, 1863, William Gibb. It says, depression of spirits and leading to insanity.
Yeah.
Not a very happy life, not a very happy reading either, is it?
No, I'm afraid there's not a lot of fun in the pool, though.
I mean, I've no doubt if I was him, I'd be depressed as well. I mean,
yeah,
it would be hard for anybody to actually feel good in his situation.
Yeah.
By the 1870s, demand for the Paisley shawl had disappeared. The hand-weaving industry, once the lifeblood of the town, had all but died. The final record for William appears in 1874, 20 years after his first application for poor relief.
So yeah, the 18th of March,
yep,
and William Gibb died in poorhouse today.
Yeah.
So on March the 18th, he died in the poorhouse.
Yeah.
Not a very happy ending, is it?
No, it's very unfortunate.
Sad life and and an unhappy ending.
Yep.
A sad life and a miserable end, I would have thought.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a very sad story, actually, because from you feel like helpless, because when you read about the situation, the conditions, you feel like you want to reach out and help from this point of history. But that's the problem, you can't, and it did happen. And there's no real redeeming factors here. That's the sadness. There's a black cloud appears over William's life that affects the whole family, and it stays there till the very end, until he dies in the poorhouse.
Robin's final stop in Scotland is the site of the Paisley Ragged School.
Matthew actually had the best option of going to the Ragged School. It turned out it wasn't such a bad idea, because after that he did go into the army, and he had a very solid and long career, and one would say successful career. And perhaps we owe our progress in our family down to Matthew's decisions.